You're not allowed in the house until you apologize. That sentence, that voice, that moment. It didn't come with screaming or slammed doors. It came with polite finality, like a verdict already printed, folded, and handed to me on the front porch of what was supposed to be my home. 42 years, 1 marriage, 2 children, and more Sunday dinners than I could count later. And I stood there listening to my daughter-in-law say it without so much as a blink. No raised voice, no trembling lip, just a line she'd clearly practiced in the mirror. I turned to my son, expecting something. Anything. A flinch, a cough, a protest, even a glance that said he was sorry. But Darnell just stared at the floorboards like the wood grain had suddenly become the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. He said nothing. I brought over the photo boxes, I said. The ones from the attic. You told me you wanted to go through them. You went through our things, Dorothy? Tonya cut in, voice flat as a pressed tablecloth. Our things. I looked down at the 2 weathered boxes sitting on the porch. Curtis's old army dress uniform from Vietnam, baby pictures of Darnell and his sister Nadine, my late mother's letters tied with kitchen twine, all stored in my attic, in my house. No. Our house, I suppose. Ever since Darnell started paying the property taxes 10 years ago, and we'd put the title in both names for what the lawyer called legal convenience. I hadn't thought much of it then. I'd just buried Curtis, and Darnell said it would make things easier. The kind of easier that doesn't feel like betrayal until it's too late. I wasn't snooping, I said quietly. I was preserving that uniform. Curtis kept it pressed and clean for 40 years. I thought Kayla might want it someday. Tonya laughed. Short, breathy, sarcastic. Kayla doesn't even remember your husband. She was 6 when he passed. And don't act like you're the keeper of family history just because you hoard dusty boxes. Darnell still hadn't looked up. I picked up one of the boxes and pushed it forward gently with the toe of my shoe. I'll go, I said. But I'm not apologizing for remembering the people who loved me. Tonya crossed her arms. Then you're not welcome back until you do. It was late afternoon. The street had that strange hush neighborhoods get in mid-August, when school hasn't started yet but summer's already worn itself thin. I bent down slowly, knees popping like they had opinions of their own, and picked up the other box. Not a word from Darnell. Not a flicker. As I stepped down off that porch, I caught sight of the front room window, the spot where Curtis used to sit with his chess puzzles from the newspaper and a bowl of boiled peanuts. The curtains had changed. The furniture, too. Nothing left of him in there. I walked back to my car. Still parked in the same driveway I'd pulled into every day for 4 decades. Still under the magnolia tree we planted when Darnell turned 10. I didn't cry. Not when I backed out. Not when I passed the mailbox I used to hang a wreath on every December. Not even when I saw the crepe myrtles Curtis planted for me blooming beside the fence, pink as ever, stubborn as the man who put them there. I didn't cry. But something in me, something hard and patient, shifted. By the time I turned onto the main road, I'd already decided they wouldn't need to worry about keeping me out of the house. Because by that evening, it wouldn't be their house anymore. And that's how it started. Not with a blowout or a dramatic revelation, but with a sentence spoken on a porch by a woman who thought kindness expired after a certain age. She was wrong. I may be 76 years old, but I still know how to take a deep breath, draw a line, and walk across it with my head held high. And I was about to. The kitchen felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet, too neat, like a stage set dressed to look like somebody lived there. But nobody really did. I set the boxes on the table and just stood there for a minute, gripping the edges like I might lift them again, or push them away, or open my mouth and let something loose I'd been swallowing for years. I did none of that. Instead, I sat down in the chair closest to the window, the one that still groaned the way Curtis's back used to on cold mornings. Outside, the backyard looked the same. Same wild rosemary, same patch of dirt where Darnell and his father once hammered together a tree fort out of scrap wood and determination. The tree still stood, stripped of its wooden bones now, like it had outlived its usefulness. I reached into the box and pulled out a photograph. Darnell, 10 years old, grinning so wide you'd think joy had no ceiling. A missing tooth, one sock pulled up, the other bunched at the ankle. My handwriting on the back. Darnell's birthday. Red velvet cake. Hot day. I'd held on to these small things for decades, not because they were valuable, but because they were proof. Proof that I'd been here. That I'd loved. That I'd worked double shifts and cooked from scratch and cried in the bathroom and paid bills and patched screen doors and sat through every long night of fevers and fights and fear. And today, all of that had been reduced to one sentence. You're not allowed in the house. I went to the cabinet and made myself tea. Habit, more than need. The kettle hissed and I stared at the flame, watching it flicker like a question I hadn't yet dared to ask. When Curtis died, it was sudden. A stroke. One moment he was beside me at the kitchen table, sipping broth and reading aloud some ridiculous story from the Charlotte Observer, chuckling at the absurdity of it. And the next, he was slumped over, his spoon rattling against the bowl like a bell nobody answered. I held his hand while we waited for the ambulance. I never forgot how cold the room got after they carried him out. As if grief itself had reached into the walls and turned the air off. In the months that followed, I was a shadow. People came, people left. Plates of food appeared on the counter and vanished. Sisters from church brought covered dishes and verses I couldn't hear. Darnell helped with the bank forms, the insurance, the property taxes. He was good then. Thoughtful. Or maybe I just needed him to be. The house became quieter, not empty, just thinner. Like the walls had exhaled and never quite filled back up. I started volunteering at the church again, helping at the library twice a week, stitching quilts for the NICU at the hospital downtown. I kept moving. I didn't know what else to do. Then Tonya came into the picture. Beautiful, competent, the kind of woman who never forgot a birthday but always forgot to ask how you were doing. From the very beginning, she treated me like a temporary arrangement, a leftover from an earlier draft of Darnell she was busy rewriting. I tried to be gracious. I stayed out of their way. I never said a word about the decorating choices, not even when she painted over the family tree. Curtis had spent 3 weekends hand-painting on the nursery wall for little Kayla. Branches and roots and names going back 4 generations, gone under 2 coats of dove gray. I swallowed it all. Because Darnell looked happy. Because Kayla was small. Because I believed that if I stayed kind long enough, it would count for something. But kindness isn't a contract. It doesn't get you anything in writing. And apparently, it doesn't even get you through the front door. I took my tea back to the table and stared at the boxes again. Each item inside had a weight, a cost. I wasn't looking at keepsakes. I was looking at evidence. Everything I'd poured into this life, into that house, into them. And they wanted me to apologize for what? For keeping a record? For refusing to disappear quietly? A knock at the door pulled me back. I froze for a second, then stood. It was Betty, my neighbor for going on 30 years. The woman who still brought me tomatoes from her garden in the summer and called me like we were still young enough to believe the world made sense. I saw you pull in, she said, holding out a foil-covered pan. Sweet potato pie. Still warm. Betty, I said, my voice cracking before I could catch it. You always show up when everything falls apart. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. You look tired, duh. I am. Wanna talk about it? Not yet. She nodded. Well, eat first. Talk after. That's the rule. I took the pie, set it on the counter, and watched her walk back across the lawn. There was one message waiting on the answering machine. From Kayla. Hi, Grandma. Dad said you weren't feeling well. Just wanted to say I love you. Call me if you need anything. Not feeling well. I let out a breath that could have been a laugh if it weren't so bitter. They were rewriting the story already. Telling folks I was under the weather instead of under their boot. Too bad for them. I still own the pen. Curtis and I bought this house in the spring of 1981. It cost more than we had and came with less space than we needed. The plumbing groaned. The roof leaked in the back corner where the gutter sagged, and the porch leaned like it had a secret it was too tired to keep. But it was ours. We signed those papers with trembling hands and a giddy kind of terror, the kind that comes from doing something reckless and holy all at once. He carried me over that threshold like we were starring in our own picture show. We hadn't even unpacked the dishes yet. The kitchen linoleum was already curling at the edges, and I remember Curtis crouching down with a hammer, trying to nail it flat while I stood there holding a grocery bag full of canned collard greens and a bottle of Moscato we got on sale. He looked up at me with that grin, the one that always made me forget we were broke, and said, "We're gonna fill this place with our lives. Every corner." And we did. I found that memory tucked inside a small stained notebook at the bottom of one of the boxes. Curtis used to write his to-do lists in it like a man who expected to live forever. Fix laundry valve. Replace porch rail. Oil gate hinge. And underneath, in smaller, almost shy handwriting, plan anniversary dinner. Ask Betty for her cake recipe. I closed the notebook and looked around the kitchen. Nothing here would make a magazine cover. But every square inch held us. The scratch in the tile by the stove where Darnell dropped a cast iron skillet the first time he tried to cook eggs. The mismatched cabinet knobs Curtis found at a yard sale and swore had character. The way the afternoon sun hit the table just right around 4 o'clock, turning everything gold. These weren't decorations. They were testimony. I was here. I lived here. I built here. And now they wanted to put me out of my own life like I was company who'd stayed past closing time. When Darnell was 9, he broke his arm falling off the backyard swing set. Curtis was pulling a double shift that night, and I scooped that boy up, wrapped his arm in a dish towel, and drove 45 minutes in the rain to the only ER that took our insurance. I sat with him all night, reading silly stories out of an old Jet magazine somebody left in the waiting room, while he cried into my shoulder. Darnell doesn't remember that night. Or he does and pretends not to. What he remembers is that I kept too many boxes, wore my shoes past their prime, and couldn't figure out how to work the new phone he bought me. Somewhere along the way, I went from being the center to being in the way. I thought I'd been careful. I thought I'd pulled back far enough to give him room. But I see now, I was always going to be too much. Too present. Too inconvenient. Too alive in a house they were already decorating without me. The legal paperwork was still in the side drawer of my desk. Title held jointly. Tenancy in common. Signed and notarized. It was supposed to simplify things. After Curtis died, Darnell offered to help with the taxes, and I was too hollowed out to question it. The lawyer said it was fine, that I'd keep full usage rights, that nothing would really change. And for a while, it didn't. Then came the renovations. Darnell's idea. The kitchen needed updating, the paint was dated, and he knew a contractor from his lodge. I paid for half. Then more than half. Then all of it. I told myself, he'll come around more if the place feels like his, too. Turns out he wasn't building a bridge. He was building an alibi. When I mentioned selling the house last year, downsizing, maybe finding a little community with other women my age, Darnell shut it down. Too risky. Too much upheaval. He said it would complicate inheritance. He said I was safe where I was. Funny word. Safe. I'd never thought of safety as a cage until that moment. I looked around the kitchen one more time. The table was nicked and ringed and slightly crooked, but it was the same table where we'd played 1,000 rounds of spades. The curtains were faded, the stove had a mind of its own, and the floorboards creaked in rhythms I knew like gospel. This house didn't need saving. It needed releasing. I stood up, walked to the drawer, and pulled out the paperwork. The notary seal, the property ID, the business card from the realtor Darnell once suggested but I never dialed. I laid it all out on the table beside the untouched sweet potato pie. I didn't need their permission. I only needed my own. The banker's name was Raymond. Young face, old school manners. The kind of man who still stood up when a woman walked into the room. And when I stepped through those glass doors that morning, wearing the same navy coat I'd worn to Curtis's homegoing service. He rose from behind his desk like I was somebody worth his attention. "I'd like to make some changes regarding the deed on my property," I told him. "And I'd prefer to speak with someone who has a clear understanding of joint ownership law in North Carolina." He blinked once, then nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Let's step into the back." I came prepared. Original title deed, copies of the last 5 years of tax documents, letters from the insurance company, and the revised property assessment they'd sent after we added the new siding. Another one of Darnell's bright ideas, which I paid for in full, every last cent. Raymond reviewed everything slowly, carefully, like a man weighing each word before letting it out of his mouth. When he reached the line that named Darnell Mitchell as co-owner, he paused and looked up. "Has there been a disagreement?" he asked. "Not really," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "Just clarity." "Right." He tapped a few keys on his computer, adjusted his reading glasses, and kept his voice steady. "You own the house as tenants in common. That means your share is yours to do with as you see fit. You can sell your interest, or the entire property if the other party agrees, or you can take legal steps if they don't." I smiled. Thin. Practiced. "I have no interest in a fight, Raymond. I just want to sell the house. And your son? Will he sign off?" I slid a paper across the table. "Here's a record of every mortgage payment I've made since Curtis passed. Here's the home equity loan I took out to put Darnell through his master's program. And this is the written agreement where Darnell and I both signed that I had the right to remain in the home until my death or sale, whichever came first." Raymond scanned the document. "That clause is strong. Technically, if you decide to sell, he can't block it. He can dispute the valuation, but not the sale itself." I nodded. "Then I want a full appraisal done as soon as possible. I'll pay whatever it costs to get it rushed." He scribbled notes. "I can recommend a few good appraisers. But just so I'm clear, you're planning to sell the family home." "I'm not selling a house," I said. "I'm selling the right to erase me from my own life." He looked up again but said nothing. "Raymond," I said, "have you ever walked through your own kitchen and realized someone else rearranged every drawer without asking?" He blinked. "Have you ever sat down at your own table and felt like a visitor?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I left the bank with a list of appraisers and a date set for Friday, 2 days out. Walked across the street to the little coffee shop on the corner and sat by the window. Ordered sweet tea even though the heat was already pressing down on the sidewalk. Watched the cars pass. My phone buzzed. A text from Darnell. "Kayla wants to stop by this weekend. She misses you. Can you please not make things awkward?" No apology. No question about how I was holding up. Just a request that I smile and behave. I didn't respond. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in years. The lawyer Curtis and I had used to draft our first will. Vernon Hayes, still practicing according to the website. The receptionist picked up on the second ring. "Hayes and Porter Law. My name is Dorothy Mitchell," I said. "I need to make changes to my estate, and I'd like to ensure the process is swift and irreversible." She paused. "Irreversible. I'm not interested in second chances," I said. "Just clean ones." We set an appointment for Monday. Back at the house, I sat in the kitchen again. Looked at the boxes, the notebook, the photographs. They told me I owed an apology if I wanted back into a house I'd paid for. They never once imagined I'd sell it out from under them instead. I didn't hear from Darnell the next day. Not a call, not a text. Nothing but silence. I suppose he figured I'd gone off somewhere to sulk, that I'd spend a few days stewing in shame before crawling back with some meek little sorry. He always underestimated how long I could sit still and how deeply I could mean a thing once I'd spoken it out loud. But it was never really about the house. It was about the slow, quiet erasure that starts with tiny dismissals. Being talked over at the dinner table. Left out of holiday planning. Having the remote snatched from your hand like your preferences expired the same year your face started showing its age. That's what Tonya never understood. I didn't resent her because she was organized or opinionated or in charge. I resented her because she thought I didn't notice the ways she rewrote every room. The way she moved family pictures off the shelves and replaced them with blank canvases from HomeGoods. The way she called the kitchen her space, even though I'd baked 400-pound cakes on those counters before she ever set foot inside. She had Darnell on a string, but it wasn't forceful. It was soft, guilt-threaded. She never said, "Don't listen to your mother." She said, "I'm just trying to keep things smooth for everybody." And Darnell, God help that boy, mistook that for love. The first real crack came 5 years ago. Kayla had just turned 16, and I offered to help with her first car. Something modest, used, reliable. I'd set aside savings from a part-time job I'd taken cataloging the church archives. I mentioned it to Tonya over coffee one afternoon. She smiled that careful smile and said, "Thank you, Dorothy, but we're teaching Kayla the value of earning things on her own." Would have been a fine principle, if they hadn't surprised her with a brand new Toyota Camry the very next week. I wasn't hurt that they didn't need my money. I was hurt that they didn't want my hands in it. There's a difference. One says we've got it covered. The other says you don't belong here anymore. Curtis used to say that children stop listening to their mothers the moment they find somebody who makes them feel taller. And Lord, was he right. Tonya knew how to praise. She knew how to say, "You work so hard, and you're such a good provider," with just the right sweetness in her voice. Darnell bloomed under that light like a flower leaning toward the only window. And me. I was the shade. I stopped bringing food to their house. It never got touched. I stopped offering to keep Kayla when she was in middle school. They hired a tutor they said was more structured. I stopped buying birthday gifts they hadn't pre-approved. And each year, the space I took up in that family got smaller. My voice got quieter. My chair got pushed further from the center. Until my entire role had been whittled down to one word. Apologize. For what? For loving too hard. For holding on to things they wanted thrown away? No, ma'am. No, thank you. The appraisal team arrived Friday morning. 2 women, efficient, courteous, a touch formal, but they walked through that house with something close to reverence. One of them stopped in the hallway, studying the photograph of Curtis in his dress uniform, the one from Fort Bragg, taken the year before he shipped out. "Your husband?" she asked. "Yes. Passed in 2009. She nodded softly. "He has kind eyes." That was the first tender thing anyone had said to me in weeks. They finished their walkthrough, made their notes, and promised a full report by Monday, the same day I was set to see Vernon Hayes. That evening, I made a pie just for myself. Pecan. Curtis's favorite. I ate one warm slice standing barefoot in the kitchen, the smell of butter and brown sugar filling the house like a hymn sung low. And for the first time in years, I didn't set a second plate. Tonya never raised her voice. That was her gift. Her sharpness always came dressed in politeness, her cuts stitched in silk. It was never, "You're not welcome here." It was, "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at home." Never, "We don't want your opinion." Just, "Let's keep things simple this time." The first time I truly understood what she thought of me was the Christmas after Kayla turned 11. I had spent a whole week making a quilt square, soft fabric, careful stitching, a pattern my grandmother taught me when I was still braiding my own hair. Kayla unwrapped it, blinked, and smiled sweetly. Before the child could even say thank you, Tonya laughed and said, "Grandma sure loves her little projects, doesn't she?" Just like that, the gift became a curiosity. A relic. Something cute and outdated, like a doily on a coffee table nobody sits at. That night I found the quilt piece folded on the back of a dining chair, forgotten. I never stitched for them again. There were other moments. Hundreds. Quiet wounds that don't bleed but bruise deep enough to ache for years. She once corrected my grammar mid-sentence while I was reading one of Curtis's letters out loud. Another time she sighed and rolled her eyes when I brought my own pie to Thanksgiving dinner, said it might be too rich for Kayla. Subtle little moves designed to sound helpful, designed to make me smaller without ever having to raise a hand. And Darnell? He'd laugh nervously. Change the subject. Say things like, "She means well, Mama." But I knew what I was watching. You can feel it when someone is just waiting for you to stop being needed. I tried to tell myself it was generational. That Tonya simply didn't understand what it meant to hold a family together with your bare hands for 40 years. That she wasn't cruel. Just different. But even that excuse wore through eventually, because at some point, what they were doing stopped being carelessness. It became erasure. I used to have a chair in their living room. Nothing fancy, just the old recliner they'd taken from my den when they wanted to fill a reading corner. I'd sit in it during visits, quiet mostly, watching Darnell and Kayla argue about college plans or laugh at some show I'd never heard of. One day I came over and it was gone. When I asked, Tonya smiled and said it didn't fit the new layout. Offered me a seat at the kitchen counter instead, a bar stool with no back. I sat there 5 minutes, then told them I was tired and left early. They never asked why. That's how it happens. Not with shouting, but with replacements. Your chair. Your casserole. Your traditions. Your space. One by one, quietly swapped out. And when you finally say something, when you whisper, "This hurts," or "I don't feel seen," they look at you like you're the problem. They said I overreacted. They said I misunderstood. But when I brought those photo boxes to the porch, the ones they claimed took up too much room, and found myself standing outside a house I'd paid for with my own sweat and sorrow, all the fog cleared. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an eviction. Not from the property, from the story. I wasn't the matriarch anymore. I was an inconvenience they didn't know how to throw away politely. So they tried to starve me out with silence and suggestion. And when that didn't work, they gave me a condition. Apologize. I suppose they thought I'd be too afraid of losing the last scrap of belonging I had. But that was their miscalculation. I never feared losing my place in their house. What I feared was losing my place in my own story. And that fear. It was gone now. Burned clean through. I woke at 4:43 in the morning. No alarm. No sound. Just the kind of waking that comes when your spirit has already made a decision while your body was resting. The house was dark, the air thick with that pre-dawn stillness, the kind of quiet that feels like it knows what's coming. I sat on the edge of the bed a long time, both feet flat on the floor, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. They never did. But I stood up anyway. I didn't make coffee. Didn't switch on the gospel station the way I usually did. I just walked slow to the back door, stepped onto the porch, and listened. The neighbor's wind chimes moved without a breeze. A dog barked down the block. The street lamps flickered their last light before morning made them pointless. I remembered something Curtis told me once years ago, after he quit the factory job that had been grinding him down for 2 decades. There's a difference between giving up and deciding you're done. I didn't understand him then. I do now. I wasn't giving up on my family. I was just finished auditioning for a part they were never going to let me play. The realtor called at 9 sharp. I'd looked her up the night before. Middle-aged, steady eyes, no fake cheerfulness. Her name was Lorraine Banks. When I told her I needed someone who didn't flinch at complicated situations, she simply said, "When can I see the property?" By noon she was standing in my living room, clipboard tucked under her arm. "This is a solid home," she said, moving through the rooms like a woman who'd walked through 1,000 kitchens and could tell in seconds whether they held memories or just meal prep. "Good bones. The siding's new, I see." "Last year," I said. "Paid cash." She nodded. "You're serious about this?" "Serious as Sunday," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at me carefully but didn't push. "You'll want a pre-inspection. I've got someone I trust. We can get photos done next week. I'll list it quiet at first. Feel the market out. Unless you'd rather do an open house right away. No open house. I want buyers who come looking, not strangers poking through my drawers. She gave a faint smile. Understood. As we went over the paperwork, I caught myself looking around the living room. Clean, lived in, nothing styled or staged, just the pieces of a life. A life I thought, until a week ago, I'd finish here. But I wasn't staying out of stubbornness. I wasn't staying out of pride. I'd simply believed I had more time. Time to be needed, time to matter. Lorraine asked if there was anything she should know. Title issues, debts, family disputes. I told her everything. The joint ownership. Darnell. The clause that protected my right to sell. Her pen slowed just slightly when I said his name. Does he know you're listing it? Not yet. She didn't say another word about it. Just wrote her cell number down and slid it across the table. You call me, she said, the second he does. That night, I started packing. Not everything. Just one box. I labeled it things that belonged to me. Inside I placed Curtis's wristwatch, a photograph of us from our first year of marriage. His eyes still reckless, mine still certain. A book of poems by Nikki Giovanni I never lent to a soul, and the key to a house I was finally ready to release. Lorraine came back Monday morning with a man named Greg. Late 40s, soft-spoken. Carried a leather notebook instead of a clipboard. Pre-inspection, he said. Shouldn't take more than an hour. I gave him free rein. Watched from the kitchen as he moved through the rooms quietly, tapping walls, checking under sinks, testing outlets like he was taking the pulse of the house. I tried to keep busy. Wiped down the stove. Folded the same dish towel twice. But nothing felt solid. It was like watching my life being taken apart gently, thread by thread, not with violence, but with the careful hands of someone who understood what they were handling. Lorraine sat at the table sipping coffee I'd brewed out of habit. I've got a couple in mind already, she said. He's a retired firefighter. She's a school nurse. Looking to settle somewhere that doesn't feel empty. They've got 2 grown children, the kind that still call on Sundays and send cards on holidays. I smiled at that. She looked around the room. Houses like this are rare now. Homes with a story. Buyers feel it the second they step through the door. Sometimes stories tire people out, I said. My son's wife thinks history makes things cluttered. Lorraine set her cup down gently. Well, history is what makes a home worth buying. Greg came back in with his notes. A few things. Nothing major. Foundations strong. Roofs solid. Minor caulking needed in the upstairs bathroom. Easy fix. Lorraine smiled. We'll have it listed by Thursday. Quiet, like you wanted. If the right offer comes in, are you ready to move? I looked around the kitchen. At the window where Curtis used to stand on Sunday mornings drinking juice, he squeezed himself. At the spot by the stove where the tile cracked when Kayla dropped my good wedding china. At the cabinet door with the loose hinge I never fixed because it never seemed urgent enough. I'm ready, I said. After they left, I walked through every room alone. Not to grieve, just to see them. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old hymnals. The hallway light still blinked when the dishwasher ran. In the back bedroom, I found a single slipper under the bed, one of mine, mismatched. I sat on the floor and held it like a photograph. It hit me then, not as a thought, but as a knowing. I had loved this house harder than anyone else ever would. That evening, a text came through from Kayla. Hey, Grandma, can I swing by this weekend? I want to grab those old yearbooks you mentioned. School project. I stared at the screen a long time before typing back. You're always welcome, sweetheart. Just don't wait too long. I didn't tell her the house might not be mine by then. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I refused to lay her parents' guilt on her young shoulders. I turned off the phone and pulled another empty box from the hall closet. Labeled this one going forward. Inside, I placed the deed. Lorraine called Wednesday afternoon. "You're not going to believe this," she said, and I could hear the excitement she was trying to hold back. "A couple toured the place this morning. I know we weren't doing official showings yet, but they insisted. They'd driven past over the weekend and fell in love with the outside before they even stepped foot through the door." She paused. "They made an offer. Full asking price. No contingencies. Cash." I didn't speak at first. Just sat there staring at the corner of my kitchen table where the varnish had worn thin from decades of elbows and coffee rings and slow Saturday breakfasts. Lorraine continued, softer now. "They're originally from North Carolina. Moved out of state years ago, but they've been wanting to come back. Their son passed 2 years ago, only child. They've been looking for a place that feels like it held something real. Not new. Not staged. Lived in." The words moved through me like warm water. "How soon would they want to close?" I asked. "End of the month, if you're willing." That gave me 2.5 weeks. I nodded before remembering she couldn't see me. "Yes," I said. "Let's do it." The next day, she sent over the documents. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelope unopened for nearly an hour before slicing it open with the same knife Curtis once used to trim the roses out back. The purchase agreement was clean, clear, firm, and my signature would unfasten 42 years in the space of 2 pen strokes. I signed. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the box labeled things that belonged to me. Added 3 more items, a grocery list in Curtis's handwriting, a cloth napkin stained from the last family dinner before Kayla left for college, and the key to the garden shed he built with his own 2 hands. Then I opened a new box. Labeled it "Not Coming With Me." Into it went the Live Laugh Love wall plaque Tonya insisted on gifting me. The store-bought apron Darnell picked up from some big box place with the price tag still dangling. A candle in a scent I couldn't stand but pretended to love because Kayla had chosen it. That night I made soup. Simple, quiet soup. No extra portions. No wondering if someone might stop by. I lit a candle, not the gifted one, and sat at my table with my own book. Just me and the steam and the silence. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer. But when I opened the door, Kayla stood there. Hoodie pulled up, hair twisted in a bun, face tired but soft. "Hey, Grandma," she said. "I know I should have called. I just didn't feel like talking to anybody but you." I stepped aside to let her in. "Yearbooks." She smiled. "That, and everything else." We sat at the table for an hour. Then 2. She asked about Curtis, about the house, about the old recipe box she used to dig through as a little girl, pulling out index cards like she was finding treasure. I let her talk. Let her feel the place one more time. Eventually she looked around and said quietly, "Is it weird that I feel more at home here than I do with them?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, sweetheart. It's not weird at all." She never asked why some of the pictures were missing from the walls. Maybe she already knew. The house didn't fight the packing. I thought it might. I expected the walls to feel heavier, the drawers to stick, every object to whisper "Don't go" as I lifted it. But no. Everything yielded. Like even the house understood it was time. I started in the linen closet. Old towels faded to softness. Sheets worn thin in the center. I kept 3 sets, donated the rest. Nobody left to impress with matching pillowcases. The kitchen was harder. Not because of the things, but because of the rituals stitched into them. The chipped teapot Curtis gave me on our 10th anniversary. The casserole dish I pulled out for every holiday. A whole drawer of plastic containers with no matching lids. These weren't utensils. They were scaffolding, the structure I leaned on to make life look ordinary even when it was falling apart. I gave myself permission to cry once. Just once. Kneeling on the kitchen floor, holding a coffee mug that still had the faint shadow of Curtis's thumbprint pressed into the glaze. He used that cup every single morning. I never scrubbed it too hard. Afraid I'd wash him away. I wrapped it in a dish towel, gentle as a newborn, and placed it in the box I'd labeled mornings. I hired movers. Small local outfit, 2 young men in their 30s. One wore a back brace and kept calling me ma'am until I told him to stop. They were kind, careful, quick. Didn't ask questions when I pointed to the stack of boxes marked storage only. They loaded the furniture I was keeping, a rocking chair, a narrow writing desk, my reading chair, and left the rest for donation pickup. I hadn't told Darnell yet. Not officially. He hadn't reached out since that text about Kayla visiting. Maybe he thought silence was strategy. Maybe he figured I'd let it blow over, swallow my feelings the way I always had, and drift back into the family like a woman who'd forgotten her own name. But the family had already shifted. Not because I walked away, because I stopped begging for a seat at the table. The new place was smaller. A little rental cottage on the edge of town, 1 bedroom, a modest porch, and a garden thick with rosemary and wild mint. The second I stepped inside, it smelled like cedar and old paper. I loved it before I'd even set down my bag. Nobody had died here. Nobody had argued over dinner or uninvited a mother from her own kitchen. It was clean, honest, empty, and mine. The first night I sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile, watching the evening breeze move through the rosemary like fingers running through hair. No streetlights. Just moonlight and shadow and the sound of my own breathing. I didn't feel sad. I felt still, like all the noise had finally stepped outside to give me room. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. I reached for it slow. Kayla. Dad saw the listing today. He's losing it. Wants to talk. What should I say? I stared at the message. Then typed. Let him feel what he made. Set the phone down and let the wind keep doing its work. Kayla came again that Saturday. Paper bag full of scones and a carton of orange juice. For your fridge, she said. It looks empty. It is, I said. But on purpose. She sat at the little table near the window, eyes wandering the space. It's cute. Quiet. Smells like books and something earthy. That's the cedar shelving near the heating vent. It'll settle. Neither of us mentioned the house. We talked about her classes, her internship, the young man she liked but wouldn't own up to. I let her set the pace. She needed the ordinary more than I did. But after a while she looked down at her juice and said softly, They're angry, Grandma. Really angry. Who? Your daddy? Tonya. Mostly Daddy. He's saying you blindsided them. That you're being dramatic. I sipped my tea. They're entitled to their feelings. But aren't you going to explain? Tell them why. I leaned back. Kayla, your father doesn't want an explanation. He wants me to undo something that makes him uncomfortable. That's not the same thing. She looked pained. He says you're trying to hurt him. That you're punishing him. I looked at her carefully. Sweetheart, if I were trying to punish him, I would have left him with the property taxes. She laughed. The kind that catches in your throat, the kind that means you're not sure it's okay to find something funny right now. I reached across and took her hand. I didn't do this to punish anybody. I did it to stop punishing myself. Her eyes got glassy, but she blinked it away fast. There's something else, she said, pulling a folded envelope from her bag. This came to the old house. Tonya didn't want to bring it over, so I grabbed it. I opened it carefully. A final notice from the bank, confirmation of sale, record of transaction, verification of fund transfer. Attached was a small handwritten note in script I didn't recognize. We wish you peace in whatever comes next. I folded it and set it aside. Will you tell them where the money went? Kayla asked quietly. Not unless they ask. And if they do, I'll tell them what belongs to them. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, we walked through the garden behind the cottage. Overgrown, fragrant, alive. Kayla picked a handful of rosemary sprigs and tied them with a ribbon from her backpack. For your new kitchen, she said. I placed them in a glass jar by the window, beside the pie plate and the old wind-up timer Curtis used to set every Sunday morning. That night, I called the bank. I'd like to open a trust, I told the manager. For my granddaughter. Full amount. Long-term interest. Protected. He asked if I wanted to include any stipulations. Just one, I said. She never has to ask anyone's permission to use it. The first message came at 8:17 in the morning. Darnell. Mom. I saw the listing. We need to talk. Then a call. I let it ring. And ring. And ring. By mid-morning he'd left a voicemail. Mom. Look, I don't know what's going on. You can't just sell the house. That's the family home. My home. You didn't even talk to me about it. Please call me back. By noon, the messages got sharper. You're being irrational. This isn't like you. What are you trying to prove? And then the one that said everything. You've really disappointed me. I sat on my little porch with a mug of lukewarm tea, reading that line again and again. Not in anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. Because what he really meant was, you didn't stay in the box we built for you. And you climbed out without asking. I didn't reply. By evening, Tonya had joined in. She sent one long, structured paragraph like she was filing a formal complaint. We understand you're hurt, but decisions like this affect the whole family. You could have included us. You've destabilized things and created confusion for Kayla. We expected more from you. I laughed out loud. Not bitter. Not broken. Just honest. The family structure they kept referencing had been one way for years. A bridge with tolls going in only one direction. They never asked what I needed. Never wondered if I was happy. They assumed my silence meant agreement. That my presence meant approval. But I wasn't a decoration in the family portrait. I was a person. And for once, I had acted like one. I ignored Tonya's message too. Later that night, the phone rang again. Kayla. I picked up. They know about the trust, she said, voice low. I closed my eyes. How? Daddy spiraled after the title transfer went through. Started checking every bank alert, hoping it was a mistake. He saw the funds move. Called the bank. They wouldn't say much, but he got enough. Silence from me. They're furious, Grandma. I've never seen them like this. Did they say anything to you directly? No. She paused. But they're treating me different. Tonya's been cold. Daddy keeps saying things like, this is what happens when loyalty breaks down. I exhaled long and slow. You don't owe them a defense, baby. I know. But it's hard. I love them. Even when they're like this. I know you do, sweetheart. A long silence. Then a whisper. Did you do it for me? The trust. I did it for me, I said. And I included you because you've always seen me. You never once tried to make me small. Another pause. Then softly. Thank you, Grandma. After the call, I finally listened to Darnell's voicemail. He sounded tired. Not angry anymore, just lost. You didn't have to cut us out, Mom. I don't know what I did that was so unforgivable. But if this is really what you want, then I guess there's nothing left to say. It wasn't unforgivable, I thought. It was just unforgettable. There's a difference. I went to the desk, pulled out a notepad, and wrote a letter I never planned to send. I just needed the words out of my body and onto paper. Dear Darnell, you didn't notice the last time I set the table for you. You didn't notice when I stopped offering. You didn't ask why I went quiet. You just enjoyed the silence. You didn't do one big cruel thing. You did 100 small ones. And every time, I forgave you without a word. But that doesn't mean you didn't owe me one. Love isn't a debt to collect, son. But respect is. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done giving pieces of myself to people who never checked to see what was left. Take care of yourself. Mama. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it in the back of a drawer. Some truths aren't meant to be mailed. They're just meant to be written down so you can finally stop carrying them in your chest. The train pulled out of the station just past dawn. No grand farewell. No flurry of goodbyes. Just a soft lurch forward and the low hum of motion. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a thermos Kayla had pressed into my hands on the platform. Chamomile with honey. "Where are you going, Grandma?" she'd asked that morning. "South," I said. "Somewhere I don't have to explain myself." She didn't argue. Just hugged me tight, tucked the tea into my bag, and said, "Send me a postcard." I packed light. 2 suitcases, a handbag, and a journal. No photographs, no silverware that came in sets, just the things that were mine before anybody else laid a claim. The train rattled gently. The rhythm of the tracks felt like a borrowed heartbeat. Outside, trees gave way to fields, fields to small towns, each passing blur like an exhale I'd been holding for years. 2 hours in, I opened the journal. Nothing fancy, spiral-bound, drugstore brand. Page 1 was blank. I wrote, "I am not a burden." Then, "I am not a backup plan." And finally, "I am not sorry." Too many years spent making myself small so others wouldn't feel crowded. Holding my tongue. Swallowing my own opinions like bitter medicine meant to keep the peace. But peace isn't built on silence. It's built on truth. And the truth was simple. I had shown up for every holiday, every sickness, every milestone, every slammed door, every meal nobody thanked me for. I had been there. I just stopped being seen. Now they'd have to sit with the absence. Not as punishment. As reality. When the train stopped in a small coastal town, half cottages, half fog, I stepped off without hesitation. No reservation. Just a name scribbled on a piece of paper from a woman at church who'd told me, "You'd love it there. It's quiet and nobody asks you a thing." She was right. I found the inn, a converted farmhouse with creaky stairs and quilts thick enough to heal something. Paid for 3 nights in cash. The woman at the front desk handed me a key without looking twice at my age or my trembling hands or my single bag. Room 4. Window facing the water. That night I walked along the shore in shoes that had no business being near sand, letting the tide lap at my ankles. No one called my name. No one asked where I'd been or where I was headed. The sky stretched wide and open, and I breathed like my lungs had just remembered what they were made for. Back in the room, I wrote one more line in the journal. Leaving is not the same as disappearing. Because I hadn't vanished. I had simply stopped waiting to be invited back in. I stayed longer than planned. 3 nights became 12. The innkeeper didn't mind, gave me the off-season rate, brought warm rolls to my door each morning, and only asked once if I wanted company for supper. When I said no, she never asked again. Some mornings I walked the shore. Some afternoons I sat on the porch rereading the same pages over and over. Some evenings I wrote, not to anyone, just to name things. Naming always helped. I wrote about the smell of Curtis's old flannel. About the way Darnell's mouth used to curve when he laughed without thinking. About Kayla's hands, so much like mine, just younger and still unshaken. I wrote about the first time I ever felt dismissed, and the last time I pretended it didn't sting. And then I wrote about the house, how I'd loved it, and how it had stopped loving me back. That was the hardest truth. We're taught to believe that places hold our memories like sacred ground. But they don't. They hold them like attics, stacked, dusty, forgotten. And when the people around you stop caring enough to open the boxes, you begin to wonder whether those memories ever mattered at all. I had clung too long to rooms that forgot my name. I didn't need rooms anymore. I needed space. One morning I walked to the post office and mailed a small envelope to Kayla. Inside, a key to a safety deposit box and a handwritten note. For the day you need to start over, not because you failed, but because you refused to stay somewhere you weren't seen. The trust would grow quietly, the way the woman who built it always had. That afternoon I bought a slice of apple pie from the diner near the pier and sat at the counter beside a retired nurse who talked about nothing but jigsaw puzzles and her stubborn old cat. She didn't ask where I was from. She didn't care. She slid her sugar packet toward me without a word, and we ate in comfortable silence, two women with nothing left to prove. Walking the rocky shoreline later, I remembered something Curtis said after his worst fight with Darnell, the only argument that ever made him leave the room. "That boy's got your stubborn streak," he muttered. "Only difference is, yours knows when to stop caring what other people think." At the time I thought it was a backhanded compliment. Now I understood. It was prophecy. My phone rang once that entire week. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to explain. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the quiet. My absence was the clearest thing I'd ever said. And I knew, without drama, without revenge, that none of them would ever find the courage to ask the one question that actually mattered. What made you stop waiting for us to understand? They already knew the answer. They just never believed I'd act on it. But I had. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just completely. I didn't need acknowledgement. I didn't need a late invitation back to the table. I needed to know I could walk away carrying nothing but a suitcase, my name, and my story, still intact. And I had done exactly that. That night, I stood at the edge of the ocean and said, "Thank you," out loud. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the wind. Just to myself, for not giving in. Back at the cottage, I lit a candle and sat at my little table with a cup of tea. And I wrote one final letter, not to Darnell, not to Tonya, but to Kayla. "Sweetheart, the house is gone and I am still here. That's what I want you to carry with you. We are not defined by the rooms we're allowed into. We are defined by the ones we refuse to shrink ourselves inside of. One day you might find yourself sitting somewhere no one hears you, where your stories get dismissed and your silence gets mistaken for agreement. When that day comes, know this. You have permission to leave, to build new walls, to walk through new doors, to go where the air doesn't require an apology. I will always be proud of you, not just for being kind, but for staying awake, for knowing when kindness starts to look like disappearing. The money is yours, but more important than that, the freedom is. Use it wisely, use it boldly, use it with joy. And if anyone ever asks why you walked away, tell them you were raised by a woman who finally did the same. With all my love, Grandma." I sealed the letter and set it beside the teapot. Then I walked out into the evening air, the ocean breeze soft against my face, and for the first time in decades, I carried nothing with me. No expectations. No explanations. No burden of being understood. Just myself. Whole. Unfolding. Like something honest finally left out in the open. Like a truth that was no longer afraid of being spoken. Like a woman who walked out the door and never once looked back. If this story stirred something inside you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room you once called home, share it. Tell somebody. Leave a word below. Let the silence break somewhere. Let it begin with you.